Say, well, you can't have a poll tax. They can say you can't have a gas tax or a cigarette tax or anything else. Federal government's telling the states pretty tough what their business is. Now, you can say that they can't discriminate, but I've got to prove that it discriminates, and I can't prove it in Texas. There are more niggers voting there now than white folks. There are more of them buying poll taxes now than white folks. Higher percentage of them. And I can't show that the literacy test that discriminate against, because they haven't got any. They got no test at all. Just by God, anybody that can get up and pay $1.06 can vote.
Hi, my name is Dr. Joe Green. I'm the founder of the 2019 movement, and I wanted to share a couple of reflections with you, a couple of thoughts. You know, there's been a lot of controversy over the last year or so with this whole NFL protest, with the NFL players kneeling. Started with Colin Kaepernick, who was kneeling by himself at first, and then, you know, it's become an epidemic. Now, I just want to chime in on a couple things. And, you know, over time, my position on this has kind of evolved and changed a little bit. When Colin Kaepernick first did it, you know, I kind of understood his message. He was talking about there was inequality. You know, we saw images of police brutality and different things like that he was protesting. So, you know, it's a free country with free speech, and so he was able to express his views the way he wanted to. Not a lot of people stood with him. Not a lot of people supported him. Even after he left the team and in the off season, he wasn't with an NFL team. Not a lot of people talked about, you know, helping him out or really got involved. And what happened was, after President Trump chimed in and used some language I'm not a big fan of, he called the players the SOBs, and they start putting pressure on the players not to protest. And then the players reacted by having group protests. Now, one of the reasons I'm kind of upset with that is that nobody was there for Colin Kaepernick. That issue didn't really mean anything to the NFL players initially, but now it's an anti-Trump protest. It's not so much that they are fighting against the national anthem or anything like that. So, but the reason, I'm going to say a couple of reasons why I'm not a big fan of the protest. Now, someone like Colin Kaepernick, or whether you're a professional athlete, LeBron James, or whoever the case may be, you already have a platform. Because in order to really get your voice heard and get out there, you need resources, you need a platform, you need influence. And if you think about a professional athlete, they have all those things. So say, for instance, I'm just using Colin Kaepernick. If Colin Kaepernick really wants to protest certain things, he has every opportunity to do that. He has off season, he has the resources. There's a ton of NFL players and other professional athletes that would probably have participated with him. But I'm not a big fan of doing it on the NFL during the football games, and this is why. Here's just a couple of numbers, and I want you to hear me out before you make any type of judgment. And like I said, my thoughts on this have evolved a little bit. The more I look at the issue, the more I meditate on it and consider it. You know, when you think about the NFL and kneeling in the NFL, just using that for example, the platform that they're on actually contradicts their assertion of inequality. Why do I say that? Their platform itself, where they're at, where they're making this statement from, actually is counterproductive, because it contradicts their very position. Because if you think about it, the NFL There's a racism. I'm not denying that there's any racism in the world. There's always going to be racism. There's always going to be prejudice. There's always going to be bias. There's always going to be people being mistreated. And I do know historically people of color have been mistreated at times. But think about this for a second. The NFL is 70% black. 70% of the players in the NFL are black. Now, 70% of the players are not black because the owners just love black people necessarily. It's not 70% black because they can't find white players to play those positions. The reason the NFL is 70% black because sports is based on results. So if I can outplay someone in sports, I can get the position no matter what my color is, which again, it flies in the face of inequality when you have an opportunity in the NFL based on your performance, and it has nothing to do with race or color. For many years, many of you may or may not know that they didn't allow black quarterbacks in the NFL. There was a bias. But what happened is there was some black quarterbacks that came down the line, and they were so exceptional at playing the game that now there's a lot of black quarterbacks in the NFL. So 70% of the players are black, while 83% of the fans are white males. 83% of the fans that pay money to go to the NFL, that buy the team jerseys, that pay for the merchandise, NFL merchandise, 83% of them are white. And so when you understand that the reason that they go to the games, obviously because they want to see a good football game, that race plays very little role in professional sports. And so now you have these fans that just want to go be entertained, because that's all sports is entertainment. They're not thinking about racial prejudice. They just want to see their team win and see a good game. They want to be entertained. You have these owners who are paying these players large amounts of money based on their performance, right? It can't be based on prejudice, because if it was based on prejudice, 70% of the players wouldn't be black. So these owners are showing not as much of a bias because they're paying these huge, and some of these contracts are huge. For instance, the average rookie salary in the NFL, I'm saying average rookie salary in the NFL is $365,000 a year. Average yearly salary for an NFL rookie, that's a first year player with no experience in the NFL, is $365,000 a year. The average salary of an NFL player is $1.9 million per year. That's average. So you have people that are the number 50 guy on the bench who never gets in the game. You have kickers, punters, all these other people. The average salary is $1.9 million a year. You have some players that are making $10–20 million a year. And like I said, when you think about the fact that it's 70% black, now the average salary for U.S. citizens is $73,298 per household, or approximately $38,000 per person. So $38,000 per person in the United States is the average salary, whereas you have a rookie, a 22 or 23-year-old rookie in the NFL making $365,000 a year. So their platform and where they're coming from is actually counterproductive to their argument of inequality, right? They can use their platform, I would say, use their platform all the other days, any other position, but what you're doing is you're actually damaging your brand. You're damaging the very vessel that's helping you to gain money by the protest. The other thing is, when you think about it, like I said, they have a great opportunity. Sports in America is supposed to be a safe place, right? So when I go see a sporting event, I don't need to hear someone's political views or anything. I'm just going to get entertained. And I'm saying this as a person who acknowledges that there's racism and there's prejudice and bias in the country, but sports has always been the equalizer, because growing up, even if you played with different people from different areas, when we came together for sports, we usually put aside our race, our differences, we come together for a common goal, which is to win the game. Again, when you see, if you go, I just went to a Pittsburgh Steelers game not long ago. You can sit in the stands, you see white, Hispanic, all different races there watching the game together. And if I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan and a white person's a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, we're cheering together against the other team. So there's somewhat of a a safe space, if you will, in sports. And I think it's bad to muddy the waters. And the reason I'm saying this is because when you understand the plan of the globalists, the Illuminati, when you understand the ruling elite, they're using sports, entertainment, media, all these other places to push a certain agenda. They're trying to push a certain agenda. They're trying to fan the flames of racial, animosity between the races. They're pushing these things, and so this is one of the platforms that they're using, and we have to be very careful not to fall victim to that. But here's another thing that I have a problem with. Aside from demanding equal treatment, which we all should expect, the problem is that black people have become too dependent on the system or the government. We want to be accepted by the system instead of having our own. And if you think about in America, even if you look at average household income for the average person, they talk about white supremacy, but in America, white people or white households aren't the #1 income in America. If you take away the professional sports and those types of incomes, the average working person in America, whites are #3. You have Asians, they're #1. You have Jews that are #2, and then you have white people that are #3. So if it's such a huge bias as far as income inequality and those type of things and mistreatment, why is it that Asians, who have suffered a lot of persecution as well, historically, why is it that they have a higher median income? And it's because of strong families. It's because of strong families. They also have the strongest family unit currently in America. The Jews have a very strong family unit in America. And when you understand economics and when you understand the overall issues, it is strong families that make strong communities, not being accepted by the system. That's what we're trying to seek after. We're looking for the system to accept us. We're looking for the system to help us out. And the only thing I want the system, which is the government or the powers that be, the only thing I want them to do is level the playing field so that no one else has an unfair advantage. That's the only thing we should expect from our government. We should expect our government to treat us fairly. So if two people commit a crime, then they both should get the same sentences. That's the type of equality we want. We want to not be targeted for no reason. But other than that, we have to get out of this mindset of dependency on the system.
We'll come back to this book. A column you wrote earlier this month. Nicholas Kristof, columnist for the New York Times, got under your skin, and not for the first time. Readers of your column will know. New York Times writer Nicholas Kristof, I'm quoting you, asserts that there is you're quoting him, overwhelming evidence that centuries of racial subjugation still shape inequity in the 21st century, quote, closing quote, and he mentions, open quote, the lingering effects of slavery, close quote. And now this is Tom Sowell. If we wanted to be serious about evidence, we might compare where blacks stood 100 years after the end of slavery with where they stood after 30 years of the liberal welfare state.
Yes.
Explain that.
Well, in 1960, which would be almost 100 years after the end of slavery,
Right.
22% of black kids grew up in homes with only one parent.
Just 22%.
Yes.
4 out of 5 were in homes with both parents.
Yes. 30 years later, after the liberal welfare state, that number had more than tripled. And so I said, well, let us compare, if we can speculate on how much that 22% was due to the legacy of slavery. But we know that tripling was not due to the legacy of slavery. It was due to the legacy of a whole different set of policies. And you can look at it so many other ways. Education. Stuyvesant High School in New York, as you know, you get into only by passing a very tough exam. Mm-hmm. In 2012, the percentage of black students who had gotten into Stuyvesant High School was less than 1/10 of the percentage of black students who had gotten into Stuyvesant High School 33 years earlier.
I didn't know that.
There's Dunbar High School in Washington, which was an elite black high school for a very long time. In 1993, the number of kids out of Dunbar High School who went on to college was less than it was 60 years earlier, which would have been in the depth of the Great Depression. And so you can run through a whole bunch of other things like that. Look at the housing projects. the housing projects in the first half of the 20th century, during that first 100 years after slavery, did not have the high crime rates, the murder rates, the graffiti, all the rest of it. None of that was there. People, in fact, the New York Times, Christoph should read his own old papers, pointed out that on Saturday mornings, it was common in the housing project of this earlier era for parents to leave their doors unlocked, because some of the parents could afford television, some couldn't. So the ones who had television would leave their doors unlocked, and the kids from the other families could come down there and watch television with them. Well, now the latest figures show that most people below the poverty line have 2 television sets and cable, but they wouldn't dare leave their doors unlocked in a public housing project.
I'm going to tell you how strategic that is, and I'm going to give you a little documentation to back it up. Black dependency on the government has been orchestrated and is very damaging to the black community. Black dependency on the government and on the system as a whole has been well planned out and orchestrated, and is very detrimental to the community. Now, I got into a discussion with someone because what they were trying to say, there was a meme that was shared, and in this meme it talked about how we are the only group of people that embraces all the negative stereotypes against us. So, you know, the N-word, we use it, calling women hoes or bees, calling us each other dogs, and all these other things. We've embraced that recently, and someone tried to push the narrative that that's because of slavery or because of the oppression that was against us. And I'm here to say that that's not true. That's not accurate. And the reason I know it's not accurate is because us embracing the negative stereotypes that we have in our culture now, you know, calling women bees and hoes, embracing the N-word or calling each other dog and all those other things, that is a recent phenomenon. That is a recent phenomenon. Back in the 70s and the 80s, as a whole, we as black people did not embrace those terms. When I was growing up, you couldn't call a woman the B word or you would be in a serious fight. You would get in big trouble if that happened. But it's this hip-hop culture, and I would say over the last 20 to 30 years only, that we've started to embrace these negative stereotypes. And I believe that that was well orchestrated by people that they socially engineered our community by introducing these things. They use people in entertainment, mainly in the music industry, to help to socially engineer us for us to embrace and to accept these things. And that's a new phenomenon, which is why we can't blame slavery. And again, if you look at the statistics, we had strong families up until the 60s. So slavery was over in 1865. From 1865 to the 1960s, you had Jim Crow and a lot of segregatory laws, right? We still survived and had strong families. It was after the abolition of those things that we began to erode as a community. And like I said, in the 1960s, about 22% of births in the black community was out of wedlock, which means, what, 78% was husband and wife having a baby. From the 1960s until now, 75% of out-of-wedlock births in the black community, some communities as high as 78%, some urban areas, and so we only have 25% of our babies being born in a household with a mother and the father. That is a demonstration of weak families and a weak family structure. So from the 60s till now is when you see this rapid decline. The incarceration rate in the black community has gone up since the 60s, which means even through Jim Crow and slavery, the incarceration rate wasn't as high as it is now. And that has been intentional, and it's been because of the social engineering that's happening. It's because of the system that has now placed black people in dependency on the government. And how did this happen? So one of the things that you'll see, because obviously there's nobody in their right mind that could think that there's more racism in 2017 than there was in the 60s and the 50s and before that. We didn't have more resources, financial resources before then. We have more liquid wealth than we ever had as a community in America. So those are factors that we have to take out of the equation. Racism was very rampant during the time of slavery and Jim Crow, yet our families and our communities were stronger than they are now. So we can't blame racism, we can't blame lack of economics, we can't even blame the legal system, because there's a lot of laws now put in place that actually protect our rights to a certain degree. So we have to look deeper to see what is the real issue. Why are these things happening? There was a thing called the War on Poverty in the 1960s that LBJ helped to orchestrate. Now, just so you know, LBJ, who not only he pushed the war on poverty, but he also pushed for civil rights enactment. He didn't do those things because he loved black people. He was actually an avowed racist. There's many different places where he is. I even have a recording of where he's recorded using the N-word.
Suspected Russian-backed hackers exposed thousands of documents connected to one of Hillary Clinton's top donors and his network. The documents reveal billionaire George Soros has given a pro-Hillary super PAC millions of dollars while also donating to groups who oppose Israel. At the same time, he supports open borders and has reportedly given money to help with opposition research against Americans who are against radical Islam. One America's Sani Unatoa takes a closer look at these documents.
Leaked documents reveal a man who once worked with Nazis during World War II to send his fellow Jews to death camps continues to show no remorse for his actions, as he previously expressed.
It was actually probably the happiest year of my life, that year of German occupation. For me, it was a very positive experience.
That was George Soros, one of Hillary Clinton's top donors, who, according to recently leaked DNC documents, also funded several anti-Israel groups. More than 2,000 documents hacked by DC Leaks, a group believed to be backed by Russia, reveal Soros gave $2 billion to the human rights organization Adalah, which has accused Israel of war crimes and pushed for governments to cut relations with the Jewish state, a move which is in direct conflict with what Clinton has said during her 2016 campaign.
The United States and Israel must be closer than ever, stronger than ever, and more determined than ever to prevail against our common adversaries and to advance our shared values.
Another leaked file entitled Extreme Polarization and Breakdown in Civil Discourse shows Soros-funded investigations of individuals, including several Americans, who oppose radical Islam. An excerpt from the file shows the first steps of the investigation by opposition researchers working on a project for the Center for American Progress, a group which has received millions in grants from Soros. The documents say the individuals will, quote, research and track the activities of the most prominent drivers of Islamophobia. It then lists its targets, which include Liz Cheney, who leads the nonprofit Keep America Safe, Frank Gaffney, the president and founder of the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C., and Pamela Geller, who leads the Stop Islamization of America group. The Center for American Progress was founded and continues to be led by Hillary Clinton's campaign chief, John Podesta. Going beyond Israel, another memo titled List of European Elections 2014 Projects reveals at least 90 Soros projects in Europe to influence election outcomes. Another memo shows one of Soros' top priorities is to expand the U.S. electorate by 10 million voters by 2018 through lowering barriers to voter registration. His Open Society Foundations is also reportedly funding groups that want to make changes within the U.S. Census Bureau, which plays a big role in the number of House seats given to each state. Other documents show Soros wrote a letter to President Obama requesting an increase of accepting 100,000 more refugees in the U.S. annually. The hacked documents raise questions about Soros' influence over Hillary Clinton, who praised him back in 2004.
We have been given an extraordinary blessing, and at this moment in time, our country needs us. And we need people like George Soros, who is fearless and willing to step up when it counts.
During this election, Soros has donated millions to Democrats, including $8 million to super PACs supporting Hillary Clinton. Clinton has not said whether she will renounce support from Soros or give back any of the donations. Sani Unatoa, One America News.
He voted against the Voter Rights Act. He voted actually in the I think it was in the 1950s or 1940s, 1950s, I think, there was actually an anti-lynching legislation that was going through Congress, anti-lynching legislation, and Lyndon Baines Johnson voted against it. He fought against it. He fought against the Voter Rights Act and all those things. He was a racist. He was a Dixiecrat from the South, from Texas. And so all of a sudden in the 60s, we are led to believe that he had this change of heart and now he's fighting for black people. It wasn't because of that. It was because of political power. Because when you had the election of JFK over Richard Nixon, the powers that be understood that because black people now are getting the right to vote, that they had to do something because the rest of the country was kind of split. White people were split between Democrat and Republican, so they had to come up with a strategy to try to attract the black people. So they came up with what's called the War on Poverty, and they also had the Civil Rights Act that wasn't meant to strengthen our communities, but it was meant to keep us more dependent on the Democratic Party. And what Lyndon Baines Johnson was recorded as saying in his unauthorized autobiography was that he came up with a strategy that was going to get black people, but he used the N-word, voting Democrat for the next 200 years. And so you see this decline in our communities, but a higher dependency on the government. Before the 60s and the civil rights and desegregation, we had stronger communities, we had stronger families, and we had a stronger economic system because we had our own businesses. But then with desegregation, we stopped having our own businesses. And think about this: if you beat down a community for over 200 years or so, and then you desegregate and you convince them that it's a privilege for them to shop outside of their community, they naturally took their dollars outside of the community and started to spend it in other communities, which weakened the economy of the black community. So the plan with the Civil Rights Movement and the War on Poverty was a plan created for economic and community dependence on the Democrats. That was the target of that. And it's based in communism and socialism. So what you need to know is that Lyndon Baines Johnson is allegedly a socialist. He was a socialist. His initiative, which was called the New Deal, I believe it was. I'll get that information. Let me see. Well, anyway, he created an initiative that actually helped to cause more dependency of blacks on the government, but more specifically the African American community. So anyway, let's look at communism and socialism. So when we talk about the global elite that's trying to push for a one world government, a new world order, two of the tools that they used was communism and socialism. Now I know what you've been led to believe, that socialism is a way of empowering the people, or communism, but actually that is a false statement. It's a deceptive practice that actually just gets control of the population and helps to push for a one world government.
Though his family converted to Christianity, Karl Marx became a Satanist during his university years. In a poem entitled Pale Maiden, Marx wrote, "Thus haven I forfeited, I know it full well. My soul, once true to God, is chosen for hell." Over time, Marx became a 32nd degree Mason. Karl Marx met up with German philosopher Friedrich Engels. Engels joined a revolutionary group 10 years earlier, founded by Giuseppe Mazzini. It was Engels who would feed Karl Marx physically and intellectually for life. Marx published the Communist Manifesto in 1848 based on a draft from Engels. The manifesto was commissioned by the Communist League in London, whose history can be traced back to the Jacobin Club and the Illuminati. The foundations of communism are identical to the goals of the Illuminati. Karl Marx was always looking for money. He found it when Nathan Rothschild gave Marx several £1,000s to finance the cause of socialism through the Hegelian dialectic. Marx wrote Das Kapital in 1867, which became known as the Bible of the working class. While his Bible called for the working class to rise up and overthrow the financial bourgeoisie, Marx evidently did not practice what he preached. In an 1864 letter to his uncle, Marx announced that he made 400 pounds on the stock exchange. Nikolai Lenin picked up where Karl Marx left off. Lenin admired Mikhail Bakunin, who wrote, "The evil one is the satanic revolt against divine authority. Satan, the eternal rebel, the first free thinker, and the emancipator of worlds." While attending university, Lenin became a Mason.
And one of Gramsci's all-star disciples, Saul Alinsky, became one of the most influential radicals of the 1960s.
Well, Saul Alinsky was a prominent radical in 1930s Chicago. He worked closely with the Communist Party. He used to go down and train at the rifle range with Leon Dupre, who was later a mentor of Barack Obama. And they used to train to shoot because they knew the revolution was just around the corner. But that didn't come, so he got a bit more subtle.
Well, Saul Alinsky called for a community organizer to stir things up, to create agitation. In fact, he said, "You'll be accused of being an agitator," and that's exactly what you are. He wanted the haves and have-nots fighting with each other.
It wasn't until I was watching an old film from World War II that I realized what the left has been doing in America to pit the poor against the rich, blacks against whites, and the young against the old, is the same tactic Hitler used to disunify Germany.
You see, they knew that they were not strong enough to conquer a unified country. So they split Germany into small groups. They used prejudice as a practical weapon to cripple the nation. Remember that when you hear this kind of talk. Somebody's going to get something out of it, and it isn't going to be you.
And they use the conflict as justification for more government to stop the chaos. So they create the chaos, and then they step in as a solution to the chaos. And as Francis Schaeffer said, once this chaos comes, most people will willingly give over to an authoritarianism because they don't want the chaos.
His book was kind of the field manual, if you will, for these activist organizations.
Which President Obama studied and taught at a workshop for 4 years in Chicago as a community organizer for ACORN.
As I was reading through Rules for Radicals to see where he was coming from, I just happened to take a look at the dedication in the front of the book. And this is what I saw. Quote, "Lest we forget at least an over-the-shoulder acknowledgement to the very first radical, the first radical known to man who rebelled against the establishment and did it so effectively that he at least won his own kingdom, Lucifer." Unquote. Saul Alinsky, from Antonio Gramsci, has had an incredible amount of influence on our president and on our society, and he dedicates his book openly to Lucifer, Satan. I think that says more about where their ideas and plans are based than anything else.
If you would describe Saul as a professional agitator, what would your reaction be to that description?
That's okay with me. That's what you left out one word, Studs. Professional outside agitator. You see, you got to be an outside agitator to begin with, because agitators very rarely come up from the inside. Because if you come up from the inside, one or two things happens to you. Either you get knocked off, you get co-opted. That's the reason all agitators are outside agitators. And you see, when you're out to really get change, every community, every place is organized. When sociologists talk about social disorganization or that communities are disorganized, they know what they're talking about. You can go into the creditious community. It's got a policy racket going. It's got a syndicate going. It's got a political organization in there that's crooked as hell. And they're being exploited if it's a company town, but it's organized, you know? It's a contradiction in terms to say that there's such a thing as a disorganized community. So that the job of an agitator is first, if he's going to, it's really not organizing a movement, he's reorganizing it. First he's got to change the whole pattern. He's got to disorganize it. That's why he's an agitator. And after he disorganizes it, then he reorganizes.
That is the plan of communism and socialism. So communism and socialism are economic and political structures that promote equality and seek to eliminate social classes. There's two interchangeable in some ways, but different in others. So socialism is based on economics. Communism is economics and government and political. Communism frequently results in low production, mass poverty, and limited advancement. Poverty spread so widely in the Soviet Union in the 80s that its citizens revolted. So you had the fall of the Berlin Wall. You had the Soviet Union crumbling because socialism causes mass poverty. It doesn't help for exceptionalism or creativity or different things like that. And it is based in atheism, anti-God. Socialism and communism is anti-God. Now, where do they come from? Karl Marx. Some of you may have heard of Karl Marx. And Karl Marx, he was a socialist, but he also wrote the Communist Manifesto. He was an economist, a philosopher, a historian, a political theorist, journalist, and a revolutionary socialist. But here's how clever the enemy is. So we believe, or people have believed, that Karl Marx, who wrote the Communist Manifesto, was trying to empower the people. But in essence, Karl Marx was actually, and if you've ever seen my video, The Synagogue of Satan, I talk about the group. The Bible says the synagogue of Satan, that claim that there are Jews, but they're not. These Kabbalistic Ashkenazi Jews, Khazarian Jews, that's who we're talking about. So Karl Marx was actually from that. He was a part of that. He was actually Jewish, but he changed his name to Karl Marx, but his actual name, let me see here. His actual name is Chaim Herschel Mordecai. So Karl Marx's real name is Chaim Herschel Mordecai. He was an Ashkenazi Jew, and he was born in Kingdom of Prussia, not the one outside of Philadelphia, but the country, the Kingdom of Prussia, excuse me. So yeah, he changed his name to Karl Marx so that it took away the idea that he was actually a Jewish person, and he was a globalist. He was part of the Illuminati, and the Communist Manifesto, actually him and Frederick Engels came up with this, and it was actually meant to actually push the New World Order agenda, and what it does in communism and socialism, because they act like they're fighting against fascists and monarchs, but what they do is they just change the power structure, but they give the implication, or they deceive the people into thinking that they've given the power to the people, but actually they take the wealth from the people, and now the state or the government owns it all. So it makes it easier to go into a one world government when you have a communist regime, as opposed to a monarchy that most people are fascists. You would say, oh, this one person, he's a wicked ruler. But the deception in communism and socialism is that the people are empowered. But if you look at around the world, every time socialism comes up, it actually causes more poverty, and it causes just a few people, the government or the state, to have all the resources, and the people don't even have the opportunity to make a difference in their life.
Communism is most oftenly promoted as a political philosophy to help the average worker, the proletariat, fight against the, quote, oppressive business owners called the bourgeoisie. But it's actually a conspiracy controlled by the Illuminati, who have created and used communism as a mechanism to encourage the creation of an all-powerful super state. As Gary Allen puts it in his 1970s book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, quote, communism is not a movement of the downtrodden masses, but is a movement created, manipulated by, and used by power-seeking billionaires in order to gain control over the world, first by establishing socialist governments in various nations, and then consolidating them through the Great Merger into an all-powerful socialist super-state under the auspices of the United Nations.
And that's where the reason I know most people don't understand that is because we understand. I understand. I was around when the USSR was around, and we knew that the socialist Russia was the bad guys. But because of time and lack of historical understanding, and plus because the mainstream media is actually bought and paid for by the globalists, the ruling elite, they've pushed this agenda that socialism is not a bad thing. They've gotten us to become more of a socialist society, and somebody like Bernie Sanders runs openly as a socialist, and he gets a lot of support. You also have to understand that the Nazis in Germany were actually socialists. That was the Socialist Party of Germany. And so socialism, and that was also orchestrated by the Illuminati or the global elite. They helped to push towards the one world government, the New World Order, as we see. So Karl Marx writes the Communist Manifesto, and just a couple of the points of the Communist Manifesto. Here's a quote. There's a book called The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which is supposed to be the playbook for the Illuminati. And in the book, it says, in order to, that the true meaning of things may not strike the Goyim, which is the Gentiles, before the proper time, we shall mask it under an alleged ardent desire to serve the working class. So they pretended like they wanted to serve the working class. That was part of their strategy, so that the people outside would not know what their plan actually was. Now, within the context of the Communist Manifesto, you have to understand that they use many different organizations, and one of the things that Karl Marx studied was Hegel. So Hegel, you've heard me mention Hegelian dialectic, which means that they control both sides of the argument to push you into a certain area. So they act like they're fighting against the fascists. And
as early as 1928, the communists declared that the racial differences among our people constituted the weakest and most vulnerable point in our social fabric. By constantly probing and straining at this one spot, they calculated that eventually the cloth could be torn apart and that Americans could be divided, weakened, and perhaps even set against each other in open combat. We mustn't kid ourselves into thinking that the communists have placed their agitators only into the black communities. They're working both sides of the street. They want hatred, violence, and bloodshed between the races, and they don't care how they get it or whom they use, even children if necessary. That the communist blueprint calls also for white retaliation and violence in the black communities. It's a very important objective for the Communist Party. So far, they've only been able to involve a small percentage of our Negro people in this war of national liberation. The great majority want no part of it in any form. But the one sure way to change that is to have white vigilante groups striking into the Negro sections supposedly to seek revenge. Ladies and gentlemen, the plans and preparations for a communist revolution of force and violence are far advanced. The organization behind these preparations has almost unlimited financial resources, and it provides both training and leadership based upon years of experience in many other countries. Our enemies are deadly serious about their task, and it's nothing short of national suicide for us to continue to ignore their plans and their progress. The strategy of the proletarian revolution calls for the quiet conversion of our government into a communist regime, but under the banner of socialism. Well, what is socialism? All right, let's define it. According to the dictionary, socialism is a political concept based upon the principle of government ownership and control of property, the means of production, and the avenues of commerce. Under socialism, those who run the government, and the communists are confident that in America they eventually will be the ones who do so, those who run the government will know who is to get something and who has to wait, and that represents control over human beings. What has all this to do with the communist revolution in America? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it has everything to do with it, because the building of socialism is the communist revolution in America. It represents the process whereby our country can be moved gradually toward communism without the people even being aware of it. No matter what grievance we may have, real or imagined, no matter what national problems we may face, the communists seize upon these as excuses to build socialism. They have one and only one solution for all problems: more government, and then more and more until it's total government. And forgive me for saying it one more time, total government is communism.